Hello everyone, I'm your host Juan, and welcome back to DP on Wake Up. Last week we talked about a few basic things to keep in mind when approaching a fighting game, as well as input notation and how to read it. This week we're slowing it down a bit and getting into two topics that will affect each person differently. Types of controllers and types of games. Let's hop into it. When it comes to controllers, the one you choose will depend on a person-by-person basis. Personally, I play on pad, which refers to a handheld controller like a PlayStation or Xbox. In my opinion, PlayStation controllers are more comfortable to play on than Xbox controllers. That also depends on if you like playing with the stick or the D-pad. But I digress. Along with these, there are specialized controllers called fight pads. These controllers are specifically made for fighting games and have 2 extra buttons on the face along with the original 4. This allows you to add 2 extra button macros or shortcuts for certain games. Next we have stick, which is a rather hefty controller that emulates an arcade machine's layout. The name stick comes from the fact that there is, well, a stick that you can use to move. Along with it are 8 face buttons, which are mapped to attack buttons. A lot of pro Japanese players play with these because they get most of their practice done by visiting arcades, so it's more comfortable for them. Similar to stick, we have a hitbox, which is the same boxy shape compared to sticks, but rather than a stick, you only have buttons that correspond to a direction. They also come in smaller versions that are a bit easier to carry around called snack box. These controllers can be a bit intimidating to look at and will take a lot of time to get used to, but they are cool and I personally really want one. Similar to Hitbox is a keyboard. It's rare to find anyone who plays these at tournaments, but there are people who play at home with keyboards. I even have a couple friends who play on keyboard and they're better than me by miles. However, if you want something similar to a Hitbox, but want arrow keys like a keyboard, then the snack box might be right for you as they can be customized to have the arrow keys. Truthfully though, anything can be a controller, and I can't stress that enough. In 2018 at a tournament called Canada Cup, a player called Initial T got into the top 8 of players out of 88 contenders, playing only on a steering wheel used for racing games. He was even able to beat a prominent Japanese player at the time called Dogura. The idea of playing on anything but one of the controllers I mentioned before the keyboard was unheard of. It truly shows that you can win on anything if you practice hard enough with it. Now we can talk about the types of fighting games that exist. Fighting games come into 2 main forms, 2D and 3D, with a few more specific types shooting off from both. The main 2 types are self-explanatory. 2D fighting games are the more traditional style where the characters are on a 2D plane and can move forward, back, or jump. 3D games traditionally have characters moving around in a 3D stage, with forward, back, and jumping being the main modes of movement, while also being able to shift closer to the camera or away from the camera. For the most part, 2D games have a higher focus on giving the characters special attacks, while 3D games have a greater focus on the characters' fighting styles. In general, there's a lot of overlap when it comes to the following types of fighting games, but I'll give examples for those towards the end, so as to not confuse anyone. First up, we have a pseudo-archetype of fighting games that are more traditional to the fighting game genre. These are what I call footsie fighters, and include games like Street Fighter, Tekken, and Samurai Shodown. The term footsie is used in relation to neutral, where you are trying to control your opponent by denying them any sort of approach that lets them get into a range that gives them an advantage, while also trying to get to your safe space of advantage. These types of fighting games have a lot to do with trying to predict what your opponent will do while you further your own approach towards them. It's a game of patience as you wait to counter your opponent after they use an unsafe move or whiff an attack or whiff punishing, which can lead to a combo or simply giving you an advantage of some sort. Next up are tag fighters, which are self-explanatory but pretty complicated. It's a fighting game where you set up a team of characters to face off against another team. You start with one character and can typically switch between all 3 characters, or call the other 2 as assists, where one or both of the characters come in temporarily to use a special on the opponent, either to continue a combo or to cover some sort of weakness the others have. An example of this game where you can't switch is King of Fighters, where you select a team of 3 characters and the order they fight in, but it's a series of 1v1 fights. When switching out, the characters that was switched can typically recover some amount of health known as Grey Health. This leads to a need for strategy along with positioning your team members. The 3 positions are point, middle, and anchor, the first, middle, and last characters on your team. Point characters are meant to defeat your opponent's point without using too much meter while also gaining meter for the other 2 members. Middle characters are the second character on the team and are arguably the most important, as they need to have a lot of synergy with the others, requiring a good assist and super, and needing good damage potential. Anchor characters are the final defense on your team, and are at least important when you're ahead, as their assist is not necessarily needed, though it still needs to be good as you'll have access to it for a majority of the match. But when it's your last character, they are so important. They need to be the strongest character in terms of equalizing the match, as they should have tools to give you advantage over your opponent, as well as being self-sufficient throughout the time they're fighting. The strongest example of this is Virgil from Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, who is able to play any position, but is most notably known as an anchor due to his overwhelming kit, safe normals, and suffocating pressure. Anime fighters are a mixed bag between 2D and 3D, as they apply to the style of the characters more than gameplay, though there are some gameplay differences. 2D fighters are vastly different from footsie fighters when it comes to gameplay and strategy. There are a lot more movement, offensive, and defensive options that make the game faster paced. For example, when compared to Street Fighter V, Guilty Gear gives the player the ability to run rather than dash, or moving a short distance quickly. It also allows the player to air dash, which Street Fighter typically doesn't do. The offensive options are typically seen in the form of cancelling, which allows you to stop your attack early to be able to continue your combo where you normally wouldn't be able to. The defensive options include what's known as bursting, which stops your opponent's combo, though this can sometimes be to your own detriment, as bursting at the wrong time could leave you worse off than taking the hit. There are other defensive options that appear in various games, but there are too many to recount, so be sure to check out the tutorial for every game you play to learn what options are available for you. As I mentioned earlier, anime fighters are also about the style of character, or even the franchise, since there are many fighting games revolving around anime series like Naruto and Dragon Ball, which leads us to our next type of fighting game. Arena fighters are 3D fighting games that have you playing as one or more characters, and are characterized by having more freedom of movement compared to traditional fighting games. And while it may not always be the case, they're typically tied to anime fighters in the sense of what characters they use. Our last type of fighting game will be kusoge. Kusoge is a Japanese term for a video game that means, and excuse my language, shitty game. It is a game that can be very fun to play, but it is just poorly designed. The main trait of kusoge is that there are often game-breaking mechanics that were never fixed, and the characters in the roster are typically very unbalanced. Even so, there are communities who are dedicated to playing them because they genuinely enjoy the bugs and the lack of balance. A prime example of a kusoge game is the Fist of the North Star fighting game, or HK, which was made by Arc System Works. This game is considered to be shitty because none of the characters are balanced, and there are some rather interesting mechanics that lead to infinite combos, or combos that can be done without your opponent being able to stop it once it's begun. The broken aspect of it also has to do with how gravity works in the game, as it was coded to have gravity increase as the combos got longer, but players found a way to break it and make their opponents bounce after getting hit, which now causes what's known as a basketball combo. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of kusoge aren't necessarily bad in the sense of entertainment value, so don't be afraid to give them a shot. We talked a lot about different types of fighting games, but let's break down some of the more popular ones into what was brought up. If you're looking for 2D footsies-based fighting games, look no further than Street Fighter. It's a classic game that I'm sure everyone has heard of at some point, and now is a good time to start learning since Street Fighter 6 is coming out soon. If you wanted to go to the extreme of what 2D footsies games could be, check out Samurai Showdown, where you can lose a round in literally one hit, at least in the older games anyways. For a footsies tag fighter game, check out King of Fighters 15. The cast is massive, which allows you to mix and match for characters you both like and what will be good for your team building. If you want to add kusoge into the mix of these two, try Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 or just Marvel vs. Capcom 2. You'd probably have a fun time picking up your favorite comic or game characters to make a team. Just make sure you can fit the aforementioned Virgil as your anchor. If you want a 2D anime fighter, you can try out Guilty Gear Exit Rev 2, Guilty Gear Strive, or BlazBlue Central Fiction. All three of these games have fast-paced gameplay with a whole cast of unique characters where no two will ever feel the same. If you are looking for an anime fighter style with lots of footsies, try Uniclear. All of the characters are fairly interesting and in some ways extreme, but they never break the need for strong footsies. An easy example of an anime tag fighter, and if you're a fan of anime in general, you can try out Dragon Ball FighterZ. A good bit of the characters are locked by DLC, but there's sure to be a good team that you'll enjoy from the cast. In terms of Kusuke, Melty Blood Actions Again current code is a classic anime Kusuke where the entire cast is either very silly or broken to hell. Their newest game, Melty Blood Type Lumina, has a similar vibe, but since it's new, they're keeping it a bit more balanced. All of those games so far were 2D fighters, but if you want to step into the realm of 3D fighting games, here's a few that you can look into. I don't personally play a lot of 3D fighters, but they can be fun. The 3D footsies game you can try out is Tekken. This game series has been around for a long time, and their 8th game is releasing sometime this year. The game has its own dedicated community, and no two characters play the same, as they all use different martial arts styles. If you were waiting for an arena fighter, most of them come in the form of anime franchises. Naruto in particular has a couple, with the most prominent one being the Ninja Storm series, where you can have a team of up to 3, with one being your main character and the others being supports that can use certain assists and moves. Dragon Ball Z also has a new arena anime fighter releasing based on a much older game called Budokai Tenkaichi. And for a newer series, there was a Demon Slayer arena fighter released recently that plays similarly to Ninja Storm, so if you're a fan of that, give this one a try. I apologize for rambling towards the end, but the amount of games and the forms they come in are nearly endless. I did talk a lot and reuse some words quite a bit, so if you were lost, feel free to go back and listen again. Next week, we'll talk about character archetypes, and I'll be showing lots of examples for these. Hopefully you'll be able to find a type you enjoy. But until then, remember to DP on Wake Up.